My guest today is the founder of Living While Leading, a premier leadership development practice that focuses on collaborating with organizations to unlock leadership potential and tackle real business challenges from the inside out. I was inspired by her mission to empower women to strategically manage their careers and lives in order to make pursuing their lifelong desires a reality. In this episode, we spoke about the realities of pursuing a career, how every life stage has its own season, and why partnering with the right person can help you reach your full potential. Enjoy the episode. Hello, beautiful humans. Welcome back to another episode of the Skin I'm In podcast. I'm your host, Chanel, and this is the space where real stories meet radical self-discovery. Here, you'll find peace through clarity, purpose through inspiration, and the permission to be your authentic self through the stories of men and women who've walked the path before us. If this show moves you, hit that like button, share it with someone you care about, or subscribe so you never miss an episode. That small but powerful act helps the show grow and brings in the guest you most want to hear from. In return, my promise to you is that I'll keep showing up with the raw, the real, and the conversations that crack us wide open, reminding us we're not alone. So, let's dive in and find the light in the shadows together. Welcome to the show, Sharon. It's great to have you on.
I'm happy to be here.
I actually wanted to start with something that really piqued my interest about you, and it's a secret that you must have. And I want to know what your secret is for baking gourmet chocolate chip cookies, because that is not easy to nail. Okay, so when I saw that, I was just like, I need to ask her how she's doing this.
Well, I'll tell you, the secret is that I make my own vanilla extract. I don't buy a commercial one. So I buy vanilla beans, and then I score them. And then whatever alcohol I have at home that nobody's drinking, I put them in there, and then I let it age for about 12 months. So that's the trick.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So I always have some bottles aging in the background because I bake a lot of cookies, and that really makes a huge difference. And depending on the alcohol you use depends on the flavor of the vanilla. So that's my trick revealed to the world now.
Oh my goodness. I love that. I love it because it's patience, knowing your ingredients, the quality of your ingredients. Like, who would think to make their own vanilla essence to nail cookies? Oh, Now I want cookies.
Yeah. But I tell you, it came out of necessity because I live in Vienna, Austria, and they don't use vanilla extract. They use something that's called vanilla sugar. And my recipes are all American recipes, which call for vanilla extract. So I had to figure out a way to make it because I simply couldn't import it all the time. It was getting, really cumbersome every time I went to visit my family to always bring this stuff back. So Google and YouTube are wonderful teachers, and I found some lessons and made it myself.
I was going to say, this is kind of like the perfect place to start, really, because when we think of women in leadership roles or just even holding a lead in our own lives, I would love to know your perspective. What is the most common leadership mistakes that are being made, do you think, by women at the moment, or that you come across in your line of work?
I think one of the mistakes is the notion that if you just work really hard, that people are going to recognize your work. This is something that we are raised to believe, particularly when you're a girl. We are somehow driven by perfection, and we chase this perfection. And guess what? When you have your head down at work, grinding, everything is happening around you. People are meeting for coffee. People are going out for drinks. If you work remotely, they are chatting with one another, and you just have your head down, just grinding the whole time, thinking that someone will eventually recognize all of the contributions you're making. And it simply doesn't work like that. And I'm not trying to suggest that women should deliver less quality and work less. but I think there has to be the right sort of a balance. And I think this is one of the biggest misconceptions that we have going into, I see this in my coaching practice, not only with mid-career women, but women who have already elevated themselves. They start to understand that they somehow are missing opportunities because they're working too hard.
That is really interesting. So are you suggesting that even being present in the office, having the water cooler conversations, that they're important?
Absolutely. They're more important than anything else because this is a source of informal information. We promote people, we nominate people for stretch assignments because we know them, we like them, and we trust them. And there's no way that you can fulfill the three of those things without having personal conversations with people. And so those proverbial water cooler conversations, wherever they're taking place, are absolutely essential in being part of the fabric of an organization.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I hadn't thought about that. It kind of just clicked to me. I was just like, oh my goodness. Yeah, being present in the office would be a really a great advantage. And a lot of the executives that, I've worked with over the years, they are always very present in the office, regardless of what division they're in the organization.
I mean, of
Yeah.
course, there is more than one way to skin a cat. If you have a job that is purely a remote job, there are other ways where you can have this sort of intimacy, these one-on-one conversations remotely. But it's not, at the beginning of the Teams call before the meeting starts. Because this is a public forum, you're under pressure. You won't be able to get into any sort of meaningful conversation. But sending an invitation to someone just for virtual coffee with absolutely no agenda of trying to extract something from them can really do wonders in building these relationships. So, of course, what I tell people is if you have the possibility to be in an office, you should show your face from time to time. There is just nothing beats face to face, especially these days when I think people are completely exhausted by AI and exhausted by social media. But if you're in a situation where this simply isn't possible, then you have to be very, very proactive at getting that alone time with those people who are important to you and your organization.
And what would you say the most common things are that you're working with, like with female leaders?
I think one of the things that's really common in my practice is just renegotiating the relationship with perfection. That needs to change because perfection and chasing perfection is a losing game. Because the standard is always changing, the target is always moving. And most of the time, the standard and the target is self-imposed, right? It's not that someone tells us what perfection looks like. And so the moment that you can free yourself from this idea that everything has to be perfect, and sometimes good enough is good enough for some things. Maybe there are certain aspects of what you're doing. If you're writing contracts, legal documents, they have to be airtight. They have to be perfect. But if you are creating a downloadable PDF for, a customer or a prospect, does it really have to be perfect? Especially when you're the subject matter expert in your domain, can it be good enough to get that person who's reading it the value that they need to get from it? So this whole idea of renegotiating the relationship with perfection, it sounds like it's an easy thing to do, but it is not an easy thing to do.
Even you saying that is making me twitch. And then I thought, where is that coming from? I thought it was just my upbringing, but it seems to be so common for so many women that it's almost paralyzing in our line of work, depending on what you do.
Yeah, completely. Oftentimes we have the feeling that we don't belong in the room. People can call it imposter syndrome, you can call it insecurity, you can call it whatever you want to call it. And the moment that you have this feeling like you don't belong, there is this impulse to overcompensate in lots of different ways. And one of those ways of overcompensating is trying to drive perfection, to prove that you belong there, that you have the right to be there. There are other ways that women try to overcompensate, but that is one of those topics that comes up repeatedly in my coaching practice.
Why do you think we have this? Because it feels like a chip on the shoulder. Why do you think this is? Is it just because we've fought so hard for our place and now we still feel like we need to keep fighting for it? Like, why is this?
Well, I think there's a laundry list of reasons that go into that. I mean, here's the thing. The spaces that you move in as your career is elevating were not really designed with women in mind, right?
No.
They were not designed for us in our societies where no matter how modern we are, no matter how emancipated women are, we still sort of default to traditional gender roles, right? So if you are a woman who has elderly parents, somehow it's just by definition that you will support them in taking care of their doctor's appointments, managing their medications, and so on and so forth. That is a tremendous amount of work. If you have children at home, you are the default parent who is present and front and center all of the time. And then if you have both of them at the same time, parents and children that need help, then this is a tremendous big deal. And guess what? Your male colleagues don't have that sort of responsibility, right? And so when I say that the workplace was not designed for us, there are no accommodations when you're facing those sort of situations. There are no accommodations when you're perimenopausal and you're not feeling well because your hormones are all over the place and you don't feel good in your body. You take a sick day or you come to work and you show up. There is nothing in between. Yeah. It's that binary. And so, of course, when you have these sort of systems that we are really trying to fit in, it's like you're putting a peg in the shape that is not the shape of you, right? Then, of course, you think there's something wrong with you. And of course, you think, well, I have to make it work and I have to overcompensate and I have to do this and I have to do that. And that's part of the answer. I think this answer to the question is all encompassing. Think about how we're raised to be the nurturing one, to care for people, always to defer to others, let them speak, don't be too loud. And all of these are messages that we carry with us into adulthood. And then we wonder why we are bashful or we hesitate to raise our hand in rooms, in office rooms, in conferences. Well, because we were taught to be quiet. We were taught that silence is golden and to let our brothers and our male cousins speak. And then it was reinforced in elementary school. I mean, there's so much data to prove that in an elementary school classroom, if a teacher asks a question and the children raise their hands, the teacher more likely will select the boy to speak than to select a girl, even if that teacher is a woman. So these are kinds of things that are reinforced, from the earliest of ages. So it's no wonder that we have different sorts of struggles when we are entering professional spaces.
I mean, and it's no wonder as well that when you see men and women in leadership roles, the men seem to be thriving because they can dedicate all their time to it because they have a wife at home or they have grown children or something that's taking care of everything else, whereas the women do not have someone at home unless they have a nanny.
Yeah, I mean, anecdotally speaking, I had a career at IBM and I had a male colleague and he and I more or less started at the same time and our careers were moving at exactly the same pace. He would get promoted, I would get promoted. He would get a stretch assignment, I would get a stretch assignment. And then there was a stage where his career really started to outpace mine. And he was a friend. And he came to me, he said, Sharon, what's going on? How come you're not fighting more for your career? How come you're not, going for this promotion? And I said to him, guess what? You have something that I don't have. You have a wife at home. When you want to put your head down and work until 11 p.m., things are getting taken care of. When they tell you you need to get on an airplane tomorrow and fly someplace, you're not thinking about childcare. I said, you have a wife. I am the wife, right? I
Yeah.
can't do that. And so therefore, I have to make conscious choices, not only about my career, but how that's going to impact the whole ecosystem that I'm supporting. And he heard me and he understood it, I think, on the intellectual level. I think, on the other hand, he thought I was making up an excuse, right?
Yeah.
That I wasn't ambitious enough. And those are the kinds of challenges that we're faced with.
Jeez. Yeah. It's really hard to accept sometimes. And then at the same time, I'm like, well, that's just the card that we've been dealt with. What else are we meant to do with that? Like, how can we fight that? Because I'm of the belief, and there are many people that do not agree with me, is that we can't have it all. We really can't, unless we want an autoimmune condition with it. So, because the stress is phenomenal.
Yeah. I mean, this notion of having it all comes with a lot of, if you have this, then you can have it all. If I have a nanny, if I have a cleaning lady who not only cleans but does my grocery shopping, if I have this. So you need this whole support system around you, which, by the way, costs money, time, right? Because you need to find people who pays for these people. If you end up paying for all of this different support, what's left of your salary? Where do you save money? How do you improve your, passing on generational wealth to your children and your family? So having it all is, I think, something that I saw a lot in the magazines. She has it all, and that's what we all should be aspiring to. And then we think we're failing when we can't do it, because it's an impossible target to reach without really getting very, very transparent about how the women who really have it all, and I'm sure there are a few of them, how are they really achieving that? And if they are achieving it, what is falling to the wayside? At the expense of what are they achieving it? And then once you get into that conversation, that means actually they're not having it all. If they have to sacrifice something to get it, then they don't have it all either, right? And so I think, we've been sold a bill of goods when it comes to that particular topic.
Lies is what we've been sold.
Yeah. Well, I was trying to be polite.
No, there's no sugarcoating on this show. And no, I say that because, I speak to women in so many different areas of wellness. I also speak to men in the area of health and wellness as well, and leadership. And it always comes down to the same thing, and there's no solution for us, right? So we either choose a path that is very career driven, or we choose the path of motherhood. We can't choose them at the same time. Something has to give. It's like that you said perfectly. There has to be a sacrifice somewhere. Something is being given up somewhere. So you have to really decide on what it is that you want to give up in that moment. And it doesn't have to be permanent. It can be temporary, but there's always a sacrifice when it comes to women choosing motherhood or careerhood, or both at the same time.
Well, I think this is why it's really important to have the right life partner. Because if you're a single mother, then that's a completely different conversation. But if we're talking about in the context of you being in a partnership with someone, that is a discussion that you need to be having before there are children. Because like you said, and you said something really important here, at this phase of your career, right? So you may not be able to take your career full throttle when your children are not in school yet, right? But once they're 9 years old or a little bit older and they have a little bit more independence, that may be the chapter of your life where you say, okay, now I can give it some gas. Now I can do what I need to do. But this is also dependent on your partner picking up some of the weight, right? And I don't think that enough of us have these conversations. We just assume that our partner is going to be supportive and be on board. And then you end up with somebody who just thinks, well, that's not my job. That's what you do. Or you're better at it. You're nurturing. I'm not that person. Oh, I can't cook. Well, you can learn how to cook. You can make a grilled cheese sandwich. That's easy enough. You know what I mean? and then letting them get away with the excuses. And so, having the right sort of partner is I cannot stress enough how important that is. And oftentimes we think about those discussions as an afterthought, because of course when you're in the throes of love and and picking out a partner and all that sexual energy, that is the last thing on your mind, right? But that's part of your life, right? You're not always going to be at this high peak of crawling on top of each other all the time and just floating on the vibes of your love energy. There's a point where you have to think about, like, how are we making money? And the reality is that in most lives, you need two incomes to make things happen, right? And if you need two incomes to make things happen, that means that you have to talk about how that happens and how the careers are going to progress and when will one yield so that the other can then pick up where they left off and sort of, catch up and then move their career forward.
So let's talk about this then, because one of the things that I come across a lot as well is that women in this position don't actually know what to look for in their partner because they've had to be everything for everyone and themselves. And so what are the characteristics that a woman in this position should be looking for if they do want to have it all in phases? Who are we looking for? What are we picking?
Well, I think that as the absolute baseline, you need to have someone that you can communicate with, someone who hears you when you talk, and doesn't dismiss what you're saying. And this is something that you can determine whether or not the person fits the bill in your relationship as you're dating and going through this whole process of being together. Because that's where it all starts, right? It all starts with communicating what your needs are and being heard by the other person, and vice versa, right? Because it's not going in one direction. And then understanding whether or not this person is able to give, to yield, right? And you'll see it in the small decisions you make before you've committed to a lifetime together. When it comes to vacations, how are you deciding this? Who's picking the hotel? How are you entertaining yourselves? When you want to do this, I don't know, this tango class and the other person is not that interested in it, how do you work through those small challenges? Because it's an indicator actually of how you're going to work through the larger challenges, right? And so what I would say is, can I tell you what are the perfect characteristics of a partner? No, I can't. But what I can say is keep your eyes open. Communication is everything, and don't ignore the red flags. Oftentimes there are little hints. People show us who they are and we refuse to acknowledge it because we're in love with the dream, right? The dream partner who looks wonderful and has a great career and comes from a good family. And meanwhile, those red flags are everywhere and you just, have the blinders on and you don't see it. So that's what I would say is, at least at the minimum, communication, and don't ignore the red flags.
Yes. And I think we also have a really good ability to see the future potential of someone. And that doesn't mean that they'll actually step into it, but we kind of create that in our minds that that's possible and that's what they're going to do, but they don't.
Well, yeah.
And that's okay, but it's not their part.
Well, yeah, and the thing is, if you see the future potential in someone because you think you're going to nudge them into that potential, I would tell you, think twice. We don't change.
Do not nudge.
People change themselves. You don't change them. I mean, you can support them and you can be by their side, but at the end of the day, their motivation has to come from within, and that's not something that is your responsibility to take on. And if you do, then that's a different sort of a challenge that you're opening up yourself to.
Yeah. So what would you say then that, what would you say was the real turning point that took you from being in a corporate career to founding Living While Leading? Like what would you say that you had to be honest with yourself about first to make that transition?
Yeah, well, it's it's never an easy transition to move from corporate, and I had a corporate career. So I was working for really huge companies, publicly traded companies, heavily matrix organizations. And, one of the things about working in those kinds of spaces is you get paid very well. I was working in IT, so the salaries back then, things are changing now, but back then I got paid very well. There was always a line of sight into moving my career from the next level to from one level to the next level. But with that came a certain sort of behavior in the organizations that as I got older, it was impossible for me to ignore. Malignant leadership styles, bullying, just really not caring about the employees. And there's a certain, when you're young and you're in that space and you just want to move forward, sometimes you even subject yourself to the abuse because you know that if you can just, hunker down and get through it, when you come out on the other side, things are going to be better for you. But then there is a certain age, and I would say when I got over 50 years old, where I couldn't deal with it anymore. And the worst part was I didn't have a poker face anymore, so when people were saying utter nonsense, I was just like, are they serious? You know what I mean? And there was a point where I realized I can't thrive in these spaces anymore. These spaces, and believe me, I met a lot of wonderful people. Some people who are still my friends today, and I learned a lot. But there was a moment where I felt like being in those spaces was not the best for my health, my physical health, my mental health. And I knew that I had to do something else. What I also did was, in parallel to working my corporate career, I always had a side hustle. So it's not like I just took the leap and said, I'm going to start my own business. I had some clients which were in a completely different industry. So there was no conflict of interest or anything like that. And so I was testing my skills in real life and I was getting paid for it. And then one day, like a lot of people, when the pandemic happened, that was a moment where I really had time to reflect. And, my husband is a surgeon. And so we were exposed to COVID very early because he was going to the hospital and he was bringing this disease home to us, right? And so not only did I get it once, but I got it 3 times. And it was extremely unpleasant. But it was a time, I see it as a gift that allowed me to reflect on my life and what I wanted for myself. And it was during that period where I said, you know what, I think this is the time for me to make a move. If I don't make it now, I will never make it. And then that's when I eventually off-ramped from my corporate career and I started my own business, which, by the way, isn't an easy thing to do. Even when you think you're prepared, it's still a very tough thing to do.
Well, I mean, you've spent nearly 2 decades navigating executive rooms and companies. And you said, you've worked for really big companies. Some of them are like IBM, Citrix. But one of the things that I really loved about your posts and that piqued my interest about you and having this conversation is that as an Afro-Latina woman from the Bronx, what was that moment where you realized your identity wasn't something to minimize to fit in, but it was actually part of your leadership edge? Because that would have taken you from corporate to leading in your own space, knowing what that thing is. So what was that for you?
Yeah, I have to say that, I grew up in a time, you have to imagine, I finished university in the 80s, the early 80s. And that whole period from the 80s to the 90s, identity was not a thing. You had to look like everyone else. You had to dress like everyone else. We basically had like uniforms that we wore. I mean, of course, they were, designer clothes. I mean, nobody was really wearing designer back then, but, we had these big shoulder jackets and these pinstripe skirt suits or pantsuits, and we all looked exactly the same. And, a woman like me, I have textured hair. When I wash my hair is quite big and it's quite curly. And I wear it like that from time to time. But back then, that would have been absolutely taboo because that would be considered unprofessional to
Yeah.
show up like yourself with your hair as it grows out of your head. I mean, when you think about how crazy that
Wild.
is. So I grew up in a whole period of time when it was acceptable and expected that you hide who you are. And of course, things have started to evolve. I wouldn't say that we're there 100%, but I think there's also this inner feeling that you have where you just say, I can't shrink who I am. My experience is actually my superpower, my lived experience and my lived experience and of course my professional experience. And I'm not willing to hide that anymore. I never used to tell people that I was raised in the Bronx because I know what the reputation of the Bronx is. So for so long, I just used to say, I'm from New York. I'm from New York. And now, I wear that as a badge of honor that I grew up in public housing and in poverty with food insecurity and all of the things that go along with that. And I still managed to educate myself and to get an advanced degree and to elevate myself in these corporate spaces, and it wasn't because I hid who I was. It was eventually because I started to lean into what was about me, that I am a connector and I like working with people and I have empathy and I love developing people and I have a spirit of generosity, which I think evolves from coming from a space when you work and then when you are raised where everybody has nothing, right? That you really rely on your community and your people to get ahead, even if it's like a millimeter ahead, right? And so that's something that I learned at a very young age. And actually, without it, I don't know how I would have made it in my career or how I would make it in my business today. And so, there's just a point. I couldn't pinpoint an event that happened or like I turned this age and all of a sudden I said, Sharon, lean into who you are. But it just sort of evolved quite organically where I said, hey, this is me. This is where I am. This is what I'm about. This is how I like to lead. If you don't appreciate this leadership style, then maybe we don't need to be with one another anymore. And I need to find someplace else to work. And eventually that's what I ended up doing.
I love that you shared that story because I think that such a big part of who we become, and I know this to be true obviously for myself, but who we are as children, our upbringing, you can either choose to let it define you in a positive way or a negative way. And I think when you grow up in an environment where you don't have very much, and we grew up in the same, I grew up in a war-torn country and in bomb shelters, and so you build resilience and grit, and no amount of education can give you that when you've had to really adjust as a child and as a teenager to be able to be like, you know what, I can survive anything, because starting a business and keeping it going sometimes feels like survival. So yeah, I love that you shared that. Thank you. I would never have thought that. Like, all I know is, Jenny from the block and what I see from the movies as to what the Bronx is. Do you know what I mean? So when I look at you, I'm like, wow, you're so polished and you're so elegant. I would never have imagined that that's your upbringing. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it's interesting when we start to talk to one another and share stories. We start to learn that we have a little bit more in common than we've ever imagined, right? I didn't know about your background either, right? But if you and I were working together and we would have that coffee that we talked about earlier, or that virtual coffee, that would be something that we would have discovered eventually. And this creates some sort of a bond between us, just because we have a common past in some way. I mean, it's not identical, but we understand that what a struggle looks like and that a struggle is real. It's not something that you read on the headline of a newspaper. People are actually living that stuff every single day.
Yeah.
And it informs the kind of people they are. Then it helps you to understand a little bit more why somebody might have a scarcity mindset, right? because they
Mm.
came from nothing. And so whatever they have, they want to hang on to it, right? It helps you understand that person a little bit more, or how they're risk adverse because they had food insecurity and they know what it's like not to have food in the fridge. So they don't want to go after that next opportunity because they're afraid they might lose everything. And that's based on an experience they had in the past. So I really believe that the more that you know about people on that level, it just helps you understand them so much better. And in the context of just living your life, it just makes it that much easier when we understand more about who is in our orbit.
Yeah. You talk a little bit about, working in male-dominated industries, and I mean, some of the companies you've worked for, I would imagine. And I work in IT. I've been working in IT for a number of years, and they can be very male-dominated unless there's really good equal opportunity programs put into place into those organizations. So, what would you say some of the challenges are that women are facing in male-dominated industries, and what are the strategies that you're finding actually are really working well to overcome them? Because I think that this is something we can apply everywhere in life, right?
Right, right. Well, I mean, the challenges are some of the things we talked about before. Um, you cannot underestimate how our biases come into play when people are hiring. So what you see and what continues to happen is, an affinity bias comes into play. And an affinity bias is this bias where you like people who are like you, who may have graduated from Yale or from Harvard, or people who were avid golf players, or people who were following Manchester United, or whatever it is, right? And this affinity bias really has such an impact on who gets the job, on who gets the promotion, um, and who gets elevated, or who is allowed into the inner circle of the organization, like of the trusted people. And people need to check their biases. And when you say the word bias, people immediately think, well, I'm open to women, or I don't discriminate against blacks or Latinas. But it's so much more nuanced than that. It has so many different layers to it. And one of the things that helps actually is just to expose people to what that looks like in practice, just through some sort of workshops and training and things like that, so that they are become aware that they have certain behaviors that they're not, that impact how their organization looks. For a few weeks, I was doing a two-day leadership workshop with a large company. They're in the industrial space. And we did a bit about diversity. And it's a steel company. So you could imagine about 80% of the employees are male. And of course, that is a topic that could have fallen flat on its face because, you have all of this male energy in the room, but it didn't. Because when we started to talk about diversity is not just about gender, but it's also about education. It's also about life experience. Of course, nationality, ethnicity plays into that, religious tradition. And it was like, for me, this is common stuff. I'm talking about this all the time. And then I had these 38 people in the room, and half of them were like, wow, I never thought of it that way. You know what I mean? And so sometimes awareness is just a small part of how you can break down some of these behaviors, or at least at the minimum, get people to slow down a bit and to think about why they are making certain decisions. And if you can just slow it down and get them to reflect a little bit, sometimes this allows a different decision to be made, or allows another voice to participate in the decision making, where then it can support women and ethnic minorities, or people from, underrepresented identity groups, from having an opportunity.
Sometimes I feel like women in general are underrepresented minorities. It doesn't even matter what color we are, what our hair looks like.
Yeah.
It's like we're an afterthought. Oh, let's make sure we hit our diversity uh, 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 what's the word I'm looking for?
Targets.
Targets. Yes. So I just am like, yeah. So I see that a lot in
Yeah.
organizations as well. But one of the things that I wanted to ask you then is, I've been part of the hiring process. I've supported the hiring process in many organizations. And I find that, a lot of people, yes, it may be making decisions based on a bias, but people also, it's like you were saying before, people choose who they want to work with because work is hard enough during the day to then have to work with someone that may be really good at the job, but is a real pain to talk to and communicate on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
So, like, how do you overcome that?
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't think that anybody would willingly bring someone onto their team who is going to create friction. Because, like you said, work is hard enough. It's hard enough to, try to reach these targets that in most cases are so incredibly unrealistic that companies are setting. So I think it's one thing to say that I want to work with people who are competent. I want to work with people who deliver excellence. I'm open to all candidates of all stripes. It's another thing to say that I'm willing to work with a jerk. You know what I mean? I wouldn't work with somebody who's going to make my life difficult because guess what? You end up spending 80% of your time managing the drama that that person is bringing into the office, right? So I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't suggest that people do it. I mean, unless there's a way that you can put that person in a role where they have the least amount of impact. I just can't. Or you think that there is a way that that they can be coached out of their behavior, but then that takes again time, investment, maybe that paying for an external coach or something. And like I said before in the previous conversation about partners, people have to be willing to change themselves. You can't identify that someone is not a team player and say, I'm going to change that in them, right? I mean, you can bring it to their attention. You can measure them in their performance appraisal about this is an area where you're not doing well. And if you continue in this space, you will not be promoted. We cannot move you further because this is not behavior that we accept in our organization. So you can make it very clear that the behavior is unacceptable and not rewarded, which I can tell you I've seen in many organizations where they've had malignant players and those players continue to get rewarded. And so they don't think there's anything wrong with what they're doing. So, I mean, to some extent you can manage it, but you're not going to change people. And you have to decide, whether or not it's worth it to bring that sort of energy into your team.
Yeah. And it actually just made me think, how often do we as women allow jerks into our life in terms of a relationship, not thinking of this exact, like everything that you just spoke about, like choosing, it is like hiring for your team, and we don't make the same decisions. We don't apply the same strategies to relationships.
Yeah.
Wild. One of the things I'd noticed in my career, I work very closely with executives, have for over 20 years. And one of the things I notice most is that, especially for women, female executives, it's extremely, extremely isolating to be at the top. What would you say to the women who are listening, who are in executive roles that may have stopped pouring into their own cup, and how can they reclaim their peace and find connection in people again once
Yeah.
you reach that level?
Right. This is a topic that comes up so often. I actually just posted a YouTube video about it because it comes up so often.
Yeah.
And I think what's really important is to first recognize that it is lonely at the top, and this is not a problem of your making. So I think this is the first thing to understand, that feeling that you have, it's not because you're doing anything wrong. That's hurdle number one. The second thing is community is so important in this instance. And I mean community outside of your organization. So if you are, at a VP level, or maybe board of director level person, find a community of women who are operating also at that level. maybe not in your industry. If you start with one and say, you know what, can we have a coffee chat a half hour? I know you're busy. I know that I'm busy. Let's do that because I need someone to talk to. Because this community bond is so important because you can speak freely in a judgment-free space about the experiences that you're having. And you're not speaking about them because you want someone to solve the problem for you. It's just that you need someone who understands it and that you don't have to go into such a deep explanation because she's probably had the same experience before. And what happens is if you can enlarge this community and make this something that you're doing monthly or quarterly or whatever, it's something that you start to look forward to. This is something that gives you the energy that you need to survive the next quarter. And then the other thing is there is so much learning that happens amongst the community members because they start to exchange ideas, share best practices of what has worked for them with that type of boss or with this kind of a challenge. So you cannot underestimate the amount of learning that you get when you expose yourself to this kind of group. So my advice would be seek out a community. And if that community doesn't exist, build one. Build it yourself because you can design it the way that you want to look. You can handpick who your first members are, and you could decide how you're going to meet and what your cadence is going to be, etc. And guess what? If you've made it to that level of leadership, you know how to build things, right? So that's not a stretch for any woman at that level.
Definitely. And I'm actually curious to know, you grew up in the States, you now live in Vienna.
Yeah.
What's something have you noticed a difference between the way women approach ambition, work, and rest that may have surprised you between the two cultures, or is it kind of the same?
No, it's not the same, not at all. American people, American professional women, educated women are extremely ambitious, and an American person would not hesitate to spend 70 or 80% of their salary on childcare and support and everything just so that they can continue to move in their career. That's not something that you would see in the country that I'm living in. So first off, I think, I need to set the stage. Childcare is free here, or it doesn't cost that much money.
Okay.
It doesn't cost that much money. But the thing is that because there are a lot of social systems here, the idea of making investment, a financial investment in yourself to elevate your career, to move forward, is not something that I really see with a lot of women here. So, for example, I work as a coach. I spend a lot of energy working with mid-career women all the way up to, C-level. It is very rare that I have a client that is in Austria because they just would never pay money for a coach. And of course, I'm generalizing. Of course, there are some women who would, but as a general topic, all of my clients are not in the country that I live in, just period. And I've been in business for a number of years now. And right now I have two clients who are in Texas. So I'm in Vienna. We have a 7-hour time difference and we're working together. And so there's a difference in the way that an American woman will invest in herself versus the way that a woman here, and I'm just speaking about Austria, I can't speak about all the other European countries, operate. It's just night and day.
I wonder if that's because the support systems are stronger, better, more supportive of the family unit than it is in the US?
Well, you know what? I mean, I think that, I talk to a lot of Austrian women and they still have exactly the same challenges that American women have. Feeling othered, feeling like they're not appreciated, all of the work being dumped on them because they work so great that the boss keeps giving them more and doesn't promote them. The pain is exactly the same, but there is I don't want to say unwillingness, but there's just a reluctance to trust that if they would invest money and some outside support, that they may be able to change their situation.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I wonder. I've heard so many amazing things about Austria and Vienna specifically. So I was just like, I wonder how different it is for women there, and if they have
Yeah.
the same level of drive and ambition and determination that I guess, speaking from Australia, and I've lived in and worked in the United States and Canada. I wonder how different it is in terms of culture.
Yeah, but there's one thing I'd like to add here that's really important. The one of the agencies of the European Union publishes a report annually or semi-annually on the gender wage gap in all of the
Okay.
27 EU countries. And Austria is the second to the last on the list when it comes to gender wage gap. So Austrian women are paid significantly less than their male counterparts for doing exactly the same work. It's just to give you a sense of, where Austria is compared to the rest of the EU. So, I mean, it's just not about women and how they view their careers. It's a societal issue as well. It's a bigger issue than anything that we are able to discuss on this call today.
Wow. Are they as bothered by it as others, like in the US or in Australia? Because it's a big thing here. Like it's talked about nonstop.
No, I mean, I don't see it on, headlines. I don't see it on the cover of women's magazines or anything. And it's really shocking because the countries that are on the top of the list are countries where you would just think, why do they have such a small gender wage gap? So, for example, Poland has one of the smallest, one of the narrowest gender wage gaps in the whole of the EU, right?
Interesting.
Poland, which was a country that was in communism for quite a long time, so didn't enter the free market until, I don't know, in the late 80s or something like that, compared to Austria, which has been, a free open market country for years. So, it's just really interesting how countries where you would think, well, how did they get to the top? How did they crack the code on that? And we still haven't cracked the code in this country. And I don't have the answers for that. I don't work in economics or anything, so I don't profess to know what the answer to the question is. But it is, I think, a very interesting dynamic that happens in this nation.
What would you say is the North Star for what you do? Like even on the hard days, what is the North Star for what you do, like in your line of work? Like why do you do this, and what's the thing that gets you out of bed on the hard days to keep doing it?
Yeah, well, my business has three different dimensions to it. I do coaching, as I mentioned before. I do corporate workshops, bespoke workshops that I build for organizations with the theme of leadership and all of the different things that lead up to leadership. And I also do some public speaking. I'm invited to do keynote speeches or be on panels and stuff. And I'll start with the keynote speaking. From the time I was a little child, I always wanted to have my own TV show. Always. So I feel like the keynote speaking somehow is me realizing a dream that I had when I was a little kid, that I want to be on a stage and that I want to talk and I want to share my message about what it is that I talk about. When it comes to the coaching, I always think about myself early in my career. And I think about, I could have used this service. I could have used having someone I trusted to help me navigate my career, to keep me from wasting time doing things that I shouldn't have been doing. And so basically, my whole coaching idea is for me. It's something that I would have needed a long time ago. And so I always consider myself to be the avatar of my ideal client. And that keeps me going because you know what? I know that I make an impact when I work with women and they report back to me months later, a year later, I saw one of my clients recently, 2 months ago. I saw one of my coaching clients from 2 years ago, and she said, Sharon, everything that we talked about in our sessions, we were together for 3 months. She said, everything that we talked about, I realized that I achieved everything that I wanted to achieve. Uh, and that made me feel so great. I mean, of course, did she achieve it all because of me? No, but we talked about it. We put it out there to the universe. We put some structure around the things that she needed to do to get there. We talked about how building a high impact network would help her get there, that careers are not built alone. So things that she wasn't thinking about, we talked about, and she got there. And there are lots of those stories, and those are the stories that keep me going. Even in these tough economic times, because I'll be completely honest with you, this is a tough time for business for me. A lot of companies are not investing in any programs because of the economic uncertainty. So for every client I get, I have to fight tooth and nail to get a proposal in front of them. And, I'm not even talking about getting the proposal signed. I'm just talking about getting it in front of them because they don't even want to talk about it. So it's a really tough time, but I would say that those are the kinds of things that really keep me motivated.
Yeah. And is there anything that you believed about being a woman 10 years ago that you've had to unlearn?
I would say that one of the things that has been really important for me is to focus on the things that I can control. I think we spend a lot of time spinning our wheels, thinking about all of the things that are happening around us that we cannot influence one way or the other. And it's a great source of frustration because you wake up every day and the situation is unchanged, right? But there are so many more things that we can control. We can control how we respond to those situations. We can control whether or not we want to participate in that situation, and so on and so forth. And so for me, that was really a breakthrough to just say, you know what? That's not my thing. That's happening. I can't influence it. I don't like it, but I can influence it. And I'm going to focus on the things that I can move the needle on, even in a tiny way. Even if that means I give money to my political party, that's a tiny way. Am I going to change the way that party moves? No, of course not. But I support them in the way that I can, right? Or for example, Wikipedia. I think Wikipedia has a very noble mission that they want to have a profile for women. Because if you look at Wikipedia now, it's only men on this platform who have profiles. So I give them money because can I change Wikipedia? No, but I can give them a little bit of money to help them forward their mission. And so when I say focus on the things you can control, it doesn't mean the things that you can touch and feel, because we can't always touch and feel everything. But sometimes just your contribution and your support is a way that you can contribute to some way to getting a mission or a cause a little bit closer to where they want to be.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that because it also says a lot about what you value, right? You spend time, money, and energy into the things that you value. And if I reflect on my 20s or my 30s, I found that a lot of the times, the thing that I had to unlearn was to stop apologizing for random things, right? Like as a woman, why am I apologizing for my whole existence? So if you were coaching 25-year-old Sharon today, what is the one thing you would tell her to stop apologizing for?
Oh, that's a good question. I would say maybe it's not so much apologizing, but I would tell myself that no is an active word in your vocabulary and you can use it, right? And you don't have to make excuses for using it, right? So, the excuse sometimes is packaged in an apology that you can say, no, I don't want to go to that dinner. And that's the end of the conversation, right? As opposed to, no, I don't want to go to that dinner because I have a big speech tomorrow and I have to prepare. No, don't do that. It's no, you're not going,
sentence.
right?
Yes.
No is a complete sentence. And that would be advice I would give to my young self and to every woman that I talk to, because it's so powerful to understand that you own your time and that you can decide how you want to spend it. And you shouldn't be railroaded into doing things because of guilt or obligation or whatever it is. That's what I would tell young Sharon.
Yeah, I'm like, guilt, obligation. That is a whole other episode.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. No, this has been so beautiful. We've been trying to do this for ages. It was so worth the wait, Sharon. Thank you so much for your time today. Please tell my listeners where they can find you, how they can work with you.
Yeah. So your listeners can find me on YouTube. I have a YouTube channel. It's Sharon Ehrlich, or it's Living While Leading. And all of the things that I talked about with you, I talk about on my YouTube channel. And you can also find me on LinkedIn as well.
Awesome. Look, if you are interested in connecting with Sharon, I will include in the episode description and across socials links and ways you can do that. So if you haven't already, head on over to Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Instagram, follow the Skin I'm In podcast to be the first to know when new episodes drop. Sharon, thank you so much for this chat today.
It's been my absolute pleasure.
When I first came across one of Sharon's posts on LinkedIn, something about the way she recounted an experience after a meeting made me want to know more about her story. This conversation was a reminder that what we want in our lives and what's planned for us by the universe are often not the same thing. And not because of the what exactly, but the how and the when. And after years of boss babe culture, I'm genuinely glad to see it dying out. I love seeing women embracing every season of their life exactly as that, a season, because we really can't have it all at the same time. And the older that I get, the more I realize how hard I work matters less than what I'm working on. The things that actually matter to me, the stuff I value, the things I find myself doing in my spare time and losing track of time, they're the things that really matter the most. And surrounding myself with people that I trust, actually, people who support me and who let me support them back. It's been essential to my growth. It has also meant that I've had to shed people, places, and situations that don't serve me anymore. Everything in life goes both ways. Whether you're building a corporate career, whether you're founding a business or becoming a wife and a mother, similar strategies apply across all of it. So next time you're sat in a workshop or listening to a podcast about leadership, pay attention to the life skills it might be teaching you underneath the surface, and please, for the love of God, apply them in relationships too. If you've been listening to this show from the start, you'll know the theme. Women with successful careers almost always have a supportive partner, and they say so consistently, how important that partner is to their success in life and in love. Until next time, with gratitude and grace, have a wonderful day.